In today's episode, we're continuing our streak of listener stories, and they cover a wide range of phenomena, including lucid and prophetic dreams, to downright creepy encounters with unidentified flying objects, and everything in between. So with that in mind, let's settle in and see what these 8 listeners have to say.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground, which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision, I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7, 8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I'd like to announce a new segment that we'll be adding to the podcast, called the Paranormal Book Club. In an effort to continue adding content to our podcast, the Paranormal Book Club will be focused on some of my favorite nonfiction paranormal-based books, and the stories that I find the most fascinating. For more information on the Paranormal Book Club, stay tuned in the weeks to come. I also want to say a huge thank you to our wonderful patrons, Robin, Cassandra, Juli, Kortnie, Tiffany, Stephen, Mystica, Carley, Kyriakos, Euknecka, Mary, Andrew, and our 2 newest patrons, Sarah and Angie. Your support and generosity is truly amazing, and it makes our podcast possible. Our first story of this evening comes from Carmen. Their story is called UFO Experience. Carmen says, "Hi, Nick. I had a strange experience that happened about 10 years ago that I'd like to share. A friend and I had just got done eating a late dinner in town at a local restaurant and decided we wanted to go for a walk since it was nice out and we weren't ready to call it a night. We decided on the Lake Murray walkway we call the Dam, which was only about 10 minutes away from where we were. During our walk, we stopped about midway across and decided to take a quick break to catch our breath. As we were talking and looking out on the water, I noticed something very quick go by in the sky above us. I looked up and noticed what I thought was a very bright star in the sky. I then noticed a red light that came off or behind it and from off to the left side. As this was happening, my friend noticed that I was looking up and saw what I was staring at and said, 'What is that?' About that same time, a yellow light came off of the red light and moved above it, forming a large triangle. About a second or 2 later, it sped off towards the city. We decided to head back to the car, a little freaked out and confused as to what the hell we just experienced. We first thought that what we had seen had to be a plane, because there was a small airport close by, but I've never seen a plane hover like that in midair and take off at such a high speed. The next day, I decided to look and see if there was anything documented about nearby comets going by, and I didn't come across anything. To this day, I still can't figure out what we saw that night, and I have yet to see anything else like it. But I have come across a few news articles about seeing strange lights at night in that same area, and I can't help but wonder if that's the same thing that we saw. Thanks for reading my story, and I love listening to your podcast while I am at work. It makes my day go by. I'll write in about a paranormal experience I had about the same time. Take care, Carmen." Our next story comes from Myra. Myra's story is called Haunted House. Myra says, "Hi, Nick. I came across your podcast one Saturday while I was working some overtime. I have had multiple experiences with the paranormal, mainly due to my gift, but I'll share my first memorable experiences. When I was in 2nd grade, my mom and dad moved us to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where a lot of paranormal things happen in general. There was a lot of history there because the Union Pacific Railroad goes through our town, and the train tracks are down the street, 3 blocks from my mom's house. When I was maybe 15 or 16, I slept in the basement, and so did my 2 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters. For a long time, I slept with my door open, but after my tired eyes played a trick on me and I saw a figure in my doorway, I slept with my door closed. This also helped because it kept the cats out. My little sister was 8 or 9 at the time this happened, and she is the smallest out of our mom's 6 kids. At first glance, my sister at the time maybe looked like she was 5 or 6. She had a tendency to sneak into my room, or my mom's room, to sleep in our beds, because she had horrible separation anxiety. This particular night, I want to say it was maybe May or June. I know I was still in school. It hadn't been let out yet for the summer. I slept with a fan on. The sound was soothing, and I enjoyed sleeping in the cool air. On this night, I can't remember what woke me up, but I woke up and looked at the end of my bed, where I could see my bedroom door, my dresser, where my fan was, and a little girl. I didn't recognize the little girl, but I still thought it could be my sister. I asked her what she wanted. I was annoyed that she was in my room while I was sleeping. My sister said, "I'm going to turn this off because it makes me cold, and I don't like being cold." It was odd because as far as I knew, my sister wasn't affected by my fan because she was either in her own room or in our mom's room. When I woke up the next morning, my fan was off. I asked my sister about it the next day, and she swore that she was not in my room at all last night. My brother's Legos would be messed with as well on occasion. Pieces would go missing, or they would be moved. My younger sister came to my mom one night crying that she had seen a man in the hallway through her vanity mirror. My mom asked what kind of feeling my sister got when she saw the man, and my sister said, "A bad one." I believed it was just her imagination, and that the feeling she got was just her own fear. One night I had a friend staying the night, and she had to be up early to take a med. The light from her phone woke me up. At the time, I slept with my door open, and she said, "There is a man in your doorway." I looked at the doorway, and there was nothing there. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. A few months after these 2 occurrences, I had forgotten about the man in the doorways. I got up one night to go to the bathroom, something I never do. I woke up out of a dead sleep to do it. I went to my bedroom door, opened it up, turned my lamp on, and watched a tall shadow man walk from my brother's bedroom door into the laundry/office area near where our downstairs bathroom is. Panicked, I said, "Nope," and used the upstairs bathroom. I definitely believed that my sister saw a man, but I didn't get the negative feeling that she got, which to me meant that it was just her fear. We found out later that where my mom lives is where the old railroad camps used to be when they were building the Union Pacific Railroad. The people we had been seeing were people who we believed to be one of the conductors of the trains and his daughter. We still have experiences to this day. My mom's window AC will turn off randomly, even if there is nothing wrong with the power cord, nor is there a flipped breaker. Doors will open or shut on their own. People will be seen running from the bathroom upstairs into the kitchen, etc. My mom does believe in ghosts now, and she embraces them as they are friendly and have not presented any harm to her or any of us, even after almost 20 years of being there. Not a very scary story, but one that I quite enjoy telling. I have many more, but this is one of my favorites, because it is my first experience. Thanks for reading. I truly enjoy your podcast and listening to others' stories. Sincerely, Myra. Our next story of the night comes from Michael. Michael's story is called First Ever Shadow Figure Encounter. Michael says, "Dear Nick, I hope this finds you doing well and hanging in there during these uncertain times. My girlfriend and I have been listeners to your podcast since April 2019. I appreciate your dedication to creating a program that shares research and listener stories regarding paranormal or unexplained experiences. This story covers what I consider to be my first ever overtly paranormal experience as an adult. While I'm not suspicious by nature, and have never up until recently had any paranormal experiences of my own, I don't presuppose that science and logic can tell us everything about existence, and I have never overruled the existence of a spiritual or supernatural facet of reality. I should preface by saying that I've always been a very vivid dreamer, and have also experienced fully lucid dreams in varying frequency since I was young. In the early morning hours of Sunday, April 19th, I experienced a deeply vivid dream in which I was living with my parents in an old, unfamiliar house. The back garden of this house had a stone pathway. and as I walked the path, I noticed at one point a large raised stone with an engraving of a skull on it. Later in the dream, my mom asked me what I thought happens after death. My answer to her went along the lines of this. While I don't presuppose the existence of life or consciousness beyond death, I don't rule out the possibility, as we don't have irrefutable evidence, that consciousness begins or ends in the human brain. In retrospect, I was struck by my ability to provide such a conscious and lucid answer within a dream, as if my own subconscious was trying to make me articulate something I've always felt. What followed this dream was my first ever experience with sleep paralysis and encounter with a shadow figure. I became aware of myself lying in my bed, although I could not move, save my eyes. At this very moment of realization, I perceived a dark figure pass out of my own body, turn itself over, and pin me down on my bed, with its hands around my throat. While the figure appeared as an immaterial shadow, it felt solid, with its weight pressing down on my chest and neck. I remember asking in my mind, "What do you want?" And the entity responded by leaning down and speaking loudly into my ear in a deep, gravelly voice that sounded like stones being dragged across one another. It simply said, "A problem," and then evaporated in an instant, shaking me from my paralysis. I am aware of the neurological effects of sleep paralysis and how the brain creates the perception of figures or entities to account for the body's immobility. However, in that moment, it was a profoundly spiritual experience. I was also struck by the shadow figure's intelligent response to my question, and I will never forget the sound of its voice. I should note that, in the days and weeks leading up to this experience, I had been reading excerpts from Carl Jung's writings, namely his writings on the identification and incorporation of the shadow, which Jung believed was the embodiment of humans' capacity for mayhem and evil, something that our conscious minds often suppress and reject. Jung believed that unless you acknowledge and incorporate the existence of your own shadow personality, you cannot develop a mature self-concept and morality, and risk unconsciously allowing your shadow traits to wreak havoc in the world. Considering that I perceived this shadow figure as coming from out of my own body, and considering its answer to my question, I believe that what I experienced was a conscious embodiment of my own shadow personality. I'm also not ignorant of the fact that this experience occurred after weeks of self-quarantine and isolation that forced me to take refuge in introspection and creative pursuits. I have been working on self-recording an album, one of the songs on which is called Carl Jung. Far from feeling threatened or disturbed in the aftermath of this encounter, I feel as if I now know, more intimately, a hidden part of my own psyche and spirit, and by allowing this darkness to manifest in productive and creative ways, I prevent it from festering and becoming capable of more malevolent acts. I apologize for the long-windedness, and I appreciate you reading if you're able to find the time. Peace and well wishes, Michael. Our next story of the night comes from Chris. Chris says, "The night of my UFO experience was just a normal night. I cannot remember the exact time of year, but I know it was in the winter, in the mid-1990s. At this time I was living at home, but staying the night with my 70-year-old grandmother, so she wouldn't be alone and scared. Although she lived just around the corner from my family, I would leave and drive through the neighborhood, music loud, before getting to her house. It was an overcast sky that night. As I turned off the road I lived on, something in the sky caught my eye. This dark thing is all I can call it. It was moving southeast over the homes. It looked like it was barely missing the tops of the pine trees around it. I would say it was 100 meters long. It was cigar-shaped, but instead of it moving like a blimp, end to end, it was moving sideways, and by moving, I mean it was drifting. Like anyone with a walker could outwalk it. It had amber lights on it, but they were spaced out. It was moving toward the airport. I pulled over to the side of the road, rolled my window down, and stuck my head out. It made no sound. No motor, no exhaust, nothing, as if it was just gliding through the air. Since it was drifting so slowly, I got back on the road and drove around the big block, and I ended up on the other side of the neighborhood. It was about a mile drive. There was a copse of trees blocking my sight from where this thing was coming from. I sat there for about 20 minutes, but it was gone. It never came over the trees. When I drove to my grandmother's, it was the same road where I first saw the thing hovering. I drove slowly, still looking out the window to see if it was still in the air. I ended up back at square one, and no sight of it. It just vanished. Now, with a skeptical eye, I could say that I'm 30 miles south of the largest army installation in the world. Maybe they were test flying some new technology. I don't know. Our next story of the night comes from Holly. Holly says, "Hi, Nick. I wanted to share something that's never happened to me before, and I almost want to call it a prophetic dream, with a happy ending. A little backstory. My family lost our dog back in November, and since I moved to a different state, I wasn't able to come home to say goodbye. My parents were absolutely gutted losing him, but are finally ready to bring a puppy into their lives again, and I've been doing some searching around my area, about 8 hours from their house, for the right little guy. I found an available puppy, sent a message and a picture to my mom, and she said she'd talk about it with my dad. Last night I had a dream that I brought the puppy to their house back home and heard barking and whining outside. Our dog was there. He was so excited to meet his new little brother and show him the ropes. He was barking and wagging his tail like crazy, licking us and the puppy. Right before I inevitably woke up, he jumped into my arms, absolutely weightless. He was about 70 pounds in real life, and he licked the tears from my cheeks. I woke up in tears, but I knew he was happy for us to bring another dog into their lives. He wanted them to have this particular puppy. I can't think of any other reason that this would be so clear. Then I get a text later in the day from my mom. My dad agreed to the puppy, and they are so very excited. I get to meet up with them this weekend to bring them the puppy. I think Boogs was trying to tell me that this puppy will be so loved and looked after by his brother over the Rainbow Bridge. I just wanted to share since I've never had such a real, almost tangible dream. It had to be prophetic or something close. Thank you for reading. Wishing you all the best, safety, and health. Thanks, Holly." Our next story of the night comes from Sloane. Sloane's story is called Ghost. Sloane says, "Hi, Nick. I've been into paranormal and supernatural things since I was a kid, and came across your podcast and practically binged it all. My favorite episodes are the personal stories, so I finally decided I wanted to share one of my many stories having to do with the paranormal. So this encounter happened around 6 or 7 years ago at my friend's house, when we were around 16 years old. For just some background, my friend's house was known to be haunted because she and I both have witnessed little things, like hearing footsteps when no one was home, or finding things in places that they would never be. So when little weird things happened, no one would really freak out that much. Okay, moving on to set the scene. She was about to leave for Colorado for a family trip the next day, so I was over helping her pack and get everything together. She lived in a giant 2-story house with her parents and 2 older sisters. We were home alone and downstairs in her sister's room, because that's where all their cold weather clothes were. We were just talking and packing while listening to music off a portable Bluetooth speaker that was sitting on her sister's dresser. All of a sudden, she was getting a phone call, and I knew this because the speaker stopped playing music and started ringing like a telephone. My friend looks at me and goes, "It must be your phone, because I'm not getting a call on mine." And I looked at my phone and I told her, "I'm not getting a call either. What the hell?" And then all of a sudden, the speaker stops ringing and makes that noise when you answer a call. And all we heard was whispering, but we couldn't make out what was being said. Then we hear a whisper saying, "Get out." And then a louder voice saying, "Get out." And then screaming in the creepiest voice you can imagine coming out of the speaker, "Get out." My friend and I bolted out of the house screaming and freaking out. We didn't want to be alone in the house anymore, so we decided to just drive around until we could calm down. I want to say probably an hour or 2 later, we came back to the house, and still no one was home. And we knew this because there were no cars in the driveway except ours. We grew the strength to go back inside, but we didn't want to go into that room anymore. We decided to go into my friend's room, which is upstairs on the other side of the house, in order to just relax until someone got home so we could tell them what had happened to us. As we walked upstairs and opened her door, the Bluetooth speaker from downstairs had somehow gotten upstairs and was now sitting completely straight up in the middle of her bed, which there is no way it should have balanced like that. We ran downstairs and called her whole family and asked if any of them had been home or moved the speaker, and every one of them said no, and that they weren't going to be home until later. We both just looked at each other, and I told her, "You're sleeping at my house tonight. Get your stuff, and we're leaving right now." Our next story comes from James. James says, "I think it was maybe 1996, and my girlfriend and I had decided that we wanted to go on a ghost tour, so we called and tried to book a reservation, but because it was so close to Halloween, all the tours were already booked. We knew a couple of the hot spots around Chicago, like Resurrection Cemetery, with Resurrection Mary, and the Blue Light over Maple Lake, so we headed out to do our own tour. We got to Resurrection Cemetery and saw Richard Crow's tour bus, the one we tried to get on, and decided to follow it. We were only able to go to a few places when my girlfriend had to use a washroom, so we lost the bus, but it was still early, and I thought we could go to a couple more cemeteries, which we did. We snuck into a couple on Chicago's south side and took some pictures. Driving back toward home, we passed another cemetery where the front gates were wide open, and I said, 'Cool, let's go.' As soon as we passed those gates, my girlfriend started physically shaking, saying, 'Get out of here, get out of here, I don't like it, get out of here.' Most cemeteries have a big lot inside the gate by the office building or whatever, but this one wasn't like that, and I couldn't just turn around without driving over tombstones, so I had to keep following the path. By this time, she had tears streaming down her face, and she's yelling at me to get out. Finally, we get back through the gate, and she grabbed her head and said, 'I have a headache.' We went home and laid in the bed when my kitchen light goes on by itself, and we both sat up and looked at each other and said, 'Let's go watch some cartoons.' I went to go turn that light off. It was a pull chain type light, but it wouldn't go off. She went home, and I eventually got the light off, and eventually got some sleep. The next morning I got up and turned on the news like every other morning, and a report came on that 2 gang members were shot to death in the cemetery we were in, at about the same time we were in there. Our next story of the night comes from Ashley. Ashley's story is called Family Visit. Ashley says, "Hi, I live in Texas, and I grew up specifically in a small town in East Texas. I grew up very religious, so my belief in the spirit world made me very curious to other unconventional things, such as ghosts, UFOs, etc. On 3 occasions I experienced otherworldly experiences. The first time I was about 10 years old. I was sleeping in my bed when I suddenly felt uneasy, like something was watching me. I had fallen asleep with my light on, so when I opened my eyes to see a man who was towering over my bed, I freaked out. He was opaque from the waist up, but waist down he was misty. He had on grayish-brown looking slacks, a white short-sleeved dress shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat. He was looking at me as if he was trying to figure out who I was. I panicked and put my head under the cover. I stayed like that for what seemed like an eternity, and I finally peeked out to not see anything. Years later, when I was about 16, my grandmother was sorting through some old photos, and that's when I saw him again. It was the man with the wide-brimmed hat. I asked her, "Who is that?" She said that it was her father, my great-grandfather, whom I was named after. I was in disbelief, but I shared with her my experience that happened just years before. I asked her why he would be in our home and looking at me the way he did. She stated that before my mom bought our house and land, that it was a common place my grandfather would be. He used to farm the whole entire area where my childhood home was. Still shocked and confused, my grandmother continued to say how he and my mom were very close, and maybe he was just paying us a visit. The second time, I was about 11 or 12, and it was about Christmas time. I remember sleeping and feeling a strong urge to go outside. I got up and went to our front door and opened it with the screen door still closed. I saw a red light through the trees in the front yard. I was curious but tired, so I laid down on my back and watched the light seemingly bounce around. Suddenly it stopped. It started shining like a spotlight that was looking for something, and soon it shone through the glass door. Getting an overwhelming feeling of fear, I stood up to close the main door, but upon standing, I froze. Next thing I know, it's the next morning, and I'm back in my bed. Now I know what you're thinking. I had to be dreaming, right? Well, as I woke up, like clockwork, I heard my mom open my bedroom door and ask why the front door was open and if I was okay. I sat up quickly, and all I can remember is last night when I was panicking to close the front door. I told her what had happened, and she fussed at me for even opening the door in the middle of the night, and refused to believe me about the light. But still, all these years later, I know what I saw. Not necessarily the source of it, but what I can't figure out is what happened after I got up to close the door, and waking up the next morning. Lastly, fast forward about 3 years. I had gotten 2 of my wisdom teeth removed, and had taken pain medicine early that morning. I laid on the couch when I got home and allowed the medicine to work its magic. When I woke up that evening, I laid there on the couch with my eyes closed, listening to the TV. Suddenly, I felt heavy breathing right over my face. Before I could open up my eyes good, I got up and ran full speed to my mother's room. I never saw what would have been there, but it wasn't a person, because the amount of air couldn't have come out of one individual. Also, only my mother and I lived there, and she was in her bed, napping as well, so that definitely made the options scarce. To this day, I don't know what the last 2 things were, but I can say they definitely scared me, and I learned how real otherworldly things are. Sorry for the length. I appreciate you reading this. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Ashley. As we come to the end of yet another episode, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for listening and supporting the podcast. Until next time, I hope that all of you have a safe and healthy week. And I'd like to say thank you to Carmen, Myra, Michael, Chris, Holly, Sloane, James, and Ashley for writing in and sharing their experiences with all of us. If you believe that you or someone that you know has witnessed something unexplainable and you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, you can contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com. You may also visit paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. Please remember that no matter how insignificant or outlandish you believe your experience may seem, I'd like to hear about it. All of our contact information, as well as the sources that were referenced for today's episode, can be found in the show notes. You can also get involved with the podcast by joining our forum and by following us on social media. If you're wondering how you can support the podcast, well, you're doing it right now just by listening, and we appreciate it. You can also help by subscribing to the podcast and by sharing it with your friends. If you're looking for additional ways to show your support, you can visit patreon.com/paranormal mysteries and become a patron. Benefits include ad-free episodes and early access to select shows. New episodes of the Paranormal Mysteries podcast are produced every week and are available on all of your favorite podcast apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. From all of us at the Paranormal Mysteries podcast, thank you so much for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.